That night, the rain didn't fall. It broke. Each drop hit the tin roof like a heartbeat begging for mercy. He stood by the door with his suitcase half-zipped, avoiding my eyes, avoiding the child growing inside me. Love shouldn't end quietly, but his silence was louder than thunder, and in that silence, I heard forever slipping away. We used to laugh at storms like this. I'd hide under the blanket, and he'd pull me close, whispering that nothing outside could touch us as long as we had each other. I believed him. I believed every word that came from the man who once promised me a lifetime. Not knowing forever can sometimes end before dawn. I felt it coming long before he spoke it. The long nights, the faint perfume that wasn't mine, the way he'd flinch when I reached for his hand. He'd talk less, sigh more, and stare through me like I'd become invisible in my own home. I told myself it was stressful, that men sometimes drift when they're scared of responsibility. But the truth was simpler and crueler. He wasn't scared of fatherhood. He was tired of me. I asked him once, half laughing, half terrified, "Are you happy?" He smiled, the kind of smile that hides behind guilt. "I'm just tired," he said. But it wasn't fatigue that kept him distant. It was her. The woman who made him feel young again. The one who reminded him of a man he thought he'd lost. When he finally confessed, he didn't even cry. He just stood there, hands trembling, eyes empty. "She's different," he said. "She makes me feel alive." His words cut deeper than any blade could. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stare at him, wondering how love could turn so cold so fast. "And what about me?" I whispered. "What do I make you feel?" His silence was my answer. He packed quietly, methodically, as if leaving me was just another chore to finish before nightfall. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him fold his shirts, each movement erasing another piece of our story. My belly felt heavier than ever, my heart heavier still. "You're walking away from your child," I said, the words trembling between anger and despair. He paused, turned, and said softly, "That's why I have to go." His voice cracked like old glass. "You and the baby deserve better than what I've become." Guilt disguised as virtue. That was all it was. He wanted freedom, but he dressed it up as sacrifice. When he opened the door, the wind rushed in, cold and cruel. "Please," I whispered, stepping toward him. "Don't do this." He looked at me one last time, and for a heartbeat, I thought he'd stay. But then he turned, stepping out into the storm without another word. The world blurred. My vision swam with tears as I followed him to the porch. The rain lashed against my skin, soaking through my nightgown, chilling me to the bone. I stood barefoot in the mud, watching his figure dissolve into the night. His car engine roared to life, the red glow of his taillights cutting through the rain like the last flicker of hope. I wanted to call out, but my throat refused to move. My hands rested on my stomach, feeling the faint pulse of life beneath my palms. "It's just us now," I whispered to my unborn child, my voice trembling. "He's gone, but we'll survive." But fate wasn't done with me yet. The pain came suddenly, sharp, twisting, merciless. I gasped, clutching my stomach, my knees buckling beneath me. The world tilted, spinning between rain and lightning. I stumbled back inside, calling his name, though I knew he couldn't hear me. Each step felt heavier, the sound of the storm drowning out my cries. I reached the doorway, collapsing to the floor as thunder tore through the sky. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the wall. My breath came in ragged bursts, the pain deepening until the world began to fade. The last thing I saw were his taillights disappearing into the rain, bright, distant, and final. I whispered his name once more, my voice lost to the storm, and then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, the world was white. Too white, too quiet, too empty. The air smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. The first thing I saw was the chair beside my bed, still pulled close as if someone had once sat there but left in a hurry. I waited for his face to appear in the doorway, to see remorse in his eyes, to hear him say my name. But no one came. He was gone, and somehow his absence filled the room more than his presence ever had. The nurse moved like a ghost, quiet and efficient. Her hands were kind, but her eyes told stories I didn't want to hear. "You're lucky," she said softly as she adjusted the IV. "You almost lost the baby." The word struck harder than the pain in my body. Lucky. That word had never felt so cruel. What was luck when the person you prayed for never came? What was survival when it meant living with the weight of someone else's choice? Fragments of the night before returned like broken glass. The storm, the rain, the sound of the door slamming, the pain that tore through me like lightning. I remembered falling, calling his name, crawling toward the doorway as if love could be summoned through suffering. I remembered the cold, the taste of mud, and then, nothing, just darkness. The doctor entered, clipboard in hand, his tone professional but soft. "You need rest," he said. "Stress isn't good for either of you." Either of you. For a second I didn't understand. Then I placed my hand over my stomach. There. Faint, steady, alive. My child had survived what I thought would destroy us both. Tears burned my eyes, not from joy, but from guilt. I had begged the wrong person to stay. I should have begged for life instead. When they discharged me 2 days later, my mother came to take me home. Her face was aged by worry, her voice carrying the quiet fury only a mother can hold. She didn't mention his name. Not once. She didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. She held my hand as we left the hospital, and for the first time, I felt smaller than my pain. The house looked different when we returned. The walls seemed to lean closer, as if whispering secrets they'd heard while I was gone. The bed was too big, the air too still. His slippers were gone. His shirts no longer hung in the wardrobe. Even his toothbrush was missing, as if he had erased himself from existence. The emptiness was deliberate, surgical. I tried to cook that evening, something simple, something that used to make him smile. But every sound, the knife against the board, the water boiling, felt like a ghost of routine that no longer belonged to me. I sat at the table with a plate I couldn't touch, staring at the space across from me. My mother hovered near the door, her eyes wet. "You need to eat," she whispered. I wanted to tell her I wasn't hungry for food. I was starving for peace. Nights were the hardest. Sleep didn't come easy, not when every creak in the house sounded like his footsteps. I'd lie awake, listening to the wind outside, pretending it was his voice calling me soft names like he used to. But dawn always betrayed the truth. There was no one left to call me anything. The days blurred together after that. I learned to walk slower, to breathe carefully, to exist in fragments. I would sit by the window for hours, one hand resting on my stomach, feeling the faint movements beneath my skin. It was strange. I was growing life inside me, while feeling lifeless myself. People visited sometimes, offering pity wrapped in kindness. "You're strong," they'd say. "You'll move on." But strength felt hollow when every heartbeat reminded me of the man who'd walked away. One evening, I sat in bed scrolling through my phone, trying to distract my thoughts from the ache that never seemed to fade. The screen's glow painted my face in pale light, the only brightness in a room that had forgotten joy. I scrolled past photos of friends, families, strangers, all smiling, all whole. And then, suddenly, my breath caught. There he was, my husband, my once everything. He was standing beside a young woman, her hand resting lightly on his chest, her smile radiant and full of the kind of peace I used to pray for. The caption beneath the photo was simple: "My new beginning." My phone slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a sound louder than my heartbeat. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from disbelief that grief could still find new ways to break me. I stared at the screen through the haze of pain, wondering if she knew, if the woman smiling beside him knew how many pieces he'd left behind. The storm outside had ended, but inside me, it was just beginning again. I closed my eyes, one hand on my stomach, and whispered, "We were supposed to be his beginning, too." Her name was everywhere, whispered in gossip, written in envy, spoken with admiration. Her laughter echoed through pictures, her smile lit up screens, and her youth seemed to mock my fading reflection. She was the woman he left me for, beautiful, confident, adored. And me, I was just the silence that followed their happiness. I told myself I wouldn't look, that knowing her face wouldn't change the ache gnawing inside me. But pain has its own hunger, and curiosity became its cruelest form of self-torture. One night, I searched her name, the woman who had taken my place. And there she was, glowing in every photograph like she had never known heartbreak. Her skin smooth, her eyes bright, her body untouched by the weight of life I carried within me. Each picture was a wound reopening, her hand in his, her smile pressed against his shoulder, their joy so loud it drowned out everything I used to be. People loved her. The comments were filled with adoration. What a perfect couple. They look so in love. She deserves him. I stared at those words until the letters blurred through my tears. Deserves him. The phrase echoed in my chest like a curse. Did I ever deserve him? Or was love always a contest I was destined to lose? The next day, when I stepped outside to buy groceries, the whispers followed me like shadows. Neighbors who once praised our marriage now watched me with half-hidden pity. Some looked away, others pretended to care. I could hear their voices behind closed doors. She couldn't keep him. He found someone younger, that poor woman, pregnant and abandoned. Their sympathy felt like salt rubbed into wounds that had barely begun to close. Even my relatives, though they meant well, couldn't hide their disappointment. "You have to be strong," they said, as if strength could rebuild a broken home. "Don't think about him," they advised, not understanding that forgetting was the hardest labor of all. Every corner of the house carried his ghost, the chair where he used to read, the mug with a crack he refused to throw away, the scent of his cologne still trapped in my pillow. I tried to clean it away, but grief doesn't wash off. It lingers like smoke after a fire. Days became weeks. My belly grew heavier, my spirit thinner. The nights stretched long, filled with memories that refused to sleep. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of rain and wonder if it was the same storm still following me from that night. The night he left. The baby kicked faintly inside me, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone, that something of love, however broken, still lived within me. I began talking to the child. It became my only comfort. "You and I'd whisper, tracing circles on my stomach. "We're going to make it, even if no one believes we can." I started keeping a small notebook by my bedside, writing letters to the baby, words I couldn't say aloud without breaking. Every page was a confession of pain, of love, of the fragile hope that somehow this tiny life would give meaning to my suffering. With each passing day, I felt a shift. My tears didn't stop, but they began to change, less from weakness, more from release. Writing gave me power. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was reclaiming pieces of myself he had taken when he walked away. The woman in the photos had his heart, but I had something she would never understand. Resilience, born from ruin. Still, the nights were cruel. Loneliness crept in like a thief, stealing my calm, whispering his name in the dark. I'd imagine him laughing somewhere far away, his arms around her waist, his lips speaking the same promises that once belonged to me. The thought burned, but then the baby would move, gentle but sure, and my heart would steady. "We'll be enough," I'd say, though sometimes I didn't believe it. When the time came for my next doctor's visit, I dressed slowly, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back wasn't the same as before. Her eyes carried storms, her face wore fatigue, but there was strength too. Quiet, unwilling, unbroken. My mother came with me, her hand firm around mine as we waited in the sterile hallway. The hum of machines, the soft footsteps, the muted voices, everything felt distant. The doctor smiled as I lay on the table, applying the cold gel to my skin. The screen flickered to life, grainy and gray, showing the faint outline of the child I had learned to live for. I watched, holding my breath, waiting for that familiar sound, that fast, fluttering heartbeat that had become my reason to keep going. But it didn't come. The doctor's smile faltered. His brows furrowed as he adjusted the probe, pressing harder, searching. My mother reached for my hand. The silence grew unbearable. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at the screen, then at me, his expression softening into something I couldn't read. "The heartbeat," he began quietly, his voice almost breaking. "It's weaker than it should be." Time seemed to stop. My pulse thundered in my ears as he continued adjusting the monitor, his tone growing heavier. I could see the concern in his eyes before he spoke again. "We'll need to keep you under close observation." His words echoed through the cold room, but all I could hear was silence, the same silence that had followed me since the night he left. I stared at the screen, at the flickering shadow of the life I carried, and whispered to myself, "Don't leave me too." The contractions came like waves, determined to drown me. Pain tore through my body, raw and merciless, as if the universe itself was testing how much one heart could endure before it shattered. I screamed his name, not because I believed he would come, but because I needed to remember how it once felt to be heard. Some pains, I learned that night, no medicine could numb, especially the kind that begins in the soul. The hospital lights were too bright, too white, too indifferent. Nurses rushed around me, voices echoing through a haze of pain I could barely comprehend. "She's losing strength," one of them said. "We need to move faster." I clung to the edges of the bed as another contraction hit, my body twisting beneath the weight of life and loss colliding inside me. I remember thinking that childbirth was supposed to be sacred, shared, celebrated, held by hands that promised forever. But my forever had walked away, long before this night. There was no one waiting outside, pacing the floor, no trembling husband praying for a cry, no hand to hold as I faced the storm alone. Only me, and the faint, fluttering heartbeat of the child who refused to give up, even when I wanted to. Each scream became a memory. Between contractions, my mind betrayed me with flashes of the past. Our wedding day, his trembling vows, the ring that had once symbolized faith instead of failure. I could still feel the warmth of his hands the day he first touched my stomach, whispering that he couldn't wait to meet our baby. I had believed him. I had believed everything. Now those same hands were holding someone else, somewhere else, while I fought for the life we had made together. The doctor's voice cut through the fog. "Stay with us," he urged, his tone sharp but gentle. "We need you to push." I tried. God, I tried. But my body felt hollow, my spirit too bruised to fight. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to no one, "I can't do this." Then a voice, not his, not anyone's I recognized, whispered back, "You already are." It wasn't a sound so much as a feeling, like grace itself had leaned down to remind me that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the refusal to die. Hours passed like lifetimes. The air was thick with tension, machines humming, the scent of antiseptic and desperation mingling. I could hear the urgency in every instruction, feel the fear beneath every word. "Her heart rate's dropping," someone called. Another contraction hit, tearing through me like lightning. I screamed, not out of pain, but defiance. If this was the night I met death, I would do it fighting. And then, through the chaos, A cry. Small, sharp, fragile, but alive. The sound pierced the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. I collapsed back against the bed, sobbing, gasping, shaking from exhaustion and disbelief. The nurse lifted the tiny, trembling bundle and placed her on my chest. She was so small, her skin soft and warm, her heartbeat fluttering against mine like a whisper of hope. "She's premature," the doctor said, his voice gentle now. "But she's a fighter, just like her mother." I looked down at her, her tiny fingers curling around mine, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't grief. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was life. "Amara," I whispered through tears. "Your name is Amara, because grace is the only reason we survived." They took her away for observation soon after, her small cries echoing through the hallway until the door closed behind her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. I lay there, body broken but spirit awakening, realizing that motherhood wasn't born from perfection. It was forged from survival. The nurse returned a while later, adjusting my blanket, her movements slow, cautious. I could feel her hesitation before she spoke. "You should rest," she said softly, almost too softly. Her voice carried something unspoken, something uneasy. I turned to her, exhaustion blurring my thoughts. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door before leaning closer. "It's probably nothing," she whispered. "But someone just walked into maternity. The staff is whispering." My heart stills. "Who?" She swallowed, eyes darting toward the window. "I shouldn't say," she murmured, then sighed. "But isn't that the man who left you?" The words hung in the air, colder than the room itself. I froze, my breath caught between disbelief and dread. "He's here?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The nurse nodded slowly. "He's visiting the other woman in maternity." The world tilted, a cruel joke written by fate itself. I turned my face toward the wall, tears burning my eyes, my chest rising and falling in silent agony. Somewhere nearby, my baby slept, the proof of the love he had thrown away, while the man who created her was holding someone else's hand. The storm outside had ended, but inside me, it began, all over again. I saw him through the glass wall, flowers in his hands, a smile on his face that used to belong to me. He was laughing softly, the kind of laugh that once melted my fears. For a moment, time forgot to move. The world blurred, and all I could see was the man who once promised forever, standing in front of someone else's forever now. Every scar on my heart began to bleed again, raw and unhealed, reminding me that some wounds never fade. They just learn how to hide. I stood frozen in the hospital corridor, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hum of machines and footsteps around me. Through the transparent glass of the maternity ward, I saw him, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, his lips brushing her forehead. She looked exhausted but happy, a newborn nestled in her arms. He looked at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the center of his world. A nurse passed by and smiled faintly, assuming I was another visitor admiring the new family. I turned away quickly, my vision blurring with tears. My knees felt weak, my breath shallow. I pressed a trembling hand against the cold wall to steady myself, the metallic scent of antiseptic mixing with the bitter taste of heartbreak. He hadn't seen me. Or maybe fate was kind enough to make sure he didn't. For a brief moment, I imagined what I would have said if our eyes had met. Would I have asked him why? Would I have reminded him that while he was welcoming his new beginning, mine had almost ended? No. I realized the truth in that instant. I didn't want answers anymore. Answers wouldn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep. They wouldn't change the fact that our daughter would grow up without a father who wanted to know her. I walked out of the hospital, the sound of rain echoing on the pavement, the same kind of rain that had fallen the night he left. It felt like life's cruel habit, repeating storms to test how much I could still endure. But somewhere between the raindrops and the memories, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the same woman he had left behind. I wasn't broken, just unfinished. Anger came first, sharp, cleansing, alive. For months I had pitied myself, lived in the ruins of a love that no longer existed. But standing there, soaked in rain and rejection, I realized something he never would. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers, enough. That night, as my daughter slept beside me, her tiny breath soft against the darkness, I made a decision. I would leave. Not because I was running away, but because staying meant letting ghosts dictate my future. This city, these streets, every corner held fragments of him. I needed space to breathe, to rebuild, to be more than just the woman he left behind. I sold my jewelry, the gold bangles my mother had gifted me on my wedding day, the ring he once slid onto my finger with trembling hands. Every item carried a memory, and letting go of them hurt more than I expected. But I told myself pain could be useful too. It could be traded for peace. With the little money I had, I packed our lives into 2 suitcases and moved to another city. A small crowded apartment on the edge of a noisy market became our new home. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Free from ghosts, free from pity. I found part-time work at a local daycare, caring for other people's children while trying to raise my own. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And every time Amara laughed, I knew it was worth it. Still, the nights were quiet in a way that hurt. I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker like fading stars, wondering if he ever thought about us, if he ever felt even an ounce of the emptiness he had left behind. But then Amara would stir in her sleep, her tiny fingers clutching mine, and the ache would ease. I didn't need him to remember me. I just needed to keep moving forward. Weeks turned into months. Life began to take shape again, slowly, hesitantly. I started journaling again, filling pages not with pain, but with plans. I applied for better jobs, though rejections came more often than hope. I learned to smile through it. Survival had become my quiet rebellion. Then, one afternoon, as I was returning from work, I found an envelope slipped beneath my door. No name, no return address, just my own written neatly on the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, printed on fine paper with a logo I didn't recognize at first, Adaremi Holdings. The words blurred as I read. "We are pleased to inform you that you've been shortlisted for an administrative position at our head office. Your profile impressed us. Please confirm availability for an interview next week." At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of miracle disguised as confusion. My heart raced as I searched the name of the company online. When the web page loaded, my breath caught in my throat. The logo glowed on the screen. Elegant, familiar. It was the same company name I'd seen before, the one that appeared under every article and photo about her family. His new wife's last name was Adaremi. The letter trembled in my hands as realization sank in. Fate wasn't done with me yet. It had simply changed its disguise. I sank onto the floor, the paper clutched to my chest, torn between disbelief and dread. Was this opportunity a blessing or a cruel trick? I looked at Amara sleeping in her crib, her face peaceful and untouched by the chaos of the world. "Maybe this is our chance," I whispered, though my voice trembled. Outside, the city lights flickered, and I couldn't tell if they were signaling hope or warning. Fate loves irony. The same name that once shattered my world now gleamed at the bottom of my job offer. Adaremi Holdings. I stared at the letter for hours, my hands trembling, my heart caught between fear and need. The empire that had destroyed my marriage was now offering to rebuild my life. I should have torn it apart, burned it, walked away. But when hunger whispers louder than pride, even pain becomes negotiable. The morning of my first day, I stood outside the tall glass building, clutching my worn leather bag against my chest. The sun glared off the polished windows, turning them into mirrors that reflected everything I had once been: a wife, a believer, a woman in love. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked through the revolving doors, praying that the ghosts waiting inside wouldn't recognize me. The receptionist greeted me with a smile too bright for how broken I felt inside. "Welcome to Adaremi Holdings," she said, handing me a badge with my name printed beneath the company's golden crest. My fingers brushed the embossed letters, and a chill ran through me. That name, Adaremi, once belonged to another woman's triumph and my ruin. Now it hung around my neck like an accidental curse. Inside, the office was a world of quiet efficiency: polished floors, glass partitions, the scent of coffee and ambition. Everyone moved with purpose, dressed in confidence I hadn't worn in years. I kept my head down, grateful for anonymity, and began the slow process of finding my place among strangers who had no idea how much history was buried beneath the company's glossy reputation. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I filed documents, managed appointments, and handled calls with the kind of diligence that comes from desperation. The supervisors noticed. They said I was reliable, composed, precise. They didn't know that composure was the armor I wore to keep my pain from spilling into my work. Whispers floated through the office like perfume, soft, invasive, impossible to escape. People talked. They always did. Someone had recognized me from years ago, from a photograph in a newspaper or a gossip blog about the abandoned wife and the scandal that followed. "Poor woman," they said in hushed tones. "Her husband left her while she was pregnant." I pretended not to hear, but every word landed like a bruise. Still I smiled, nodded politely, and did my job. I had learned that dignity often meant swallowing humiliation quietly. Days turned into weeks. My body grew accustomed to the routine, but my heart stayed alert, wary of running into a ghost from my past. Each morning, I passed through the same front gate, nodding at the security guards who barely noticed me. They changed shifts often, their faces blurring into a collective anonymity. Until one day, they didn't. There was a new guard, older, quieter. His uniform hung slightly loose on his shoulders, his posture weary but familiar. Something about the way he stood, the tilt of his head, the way he avoided eye contact, tugged at a place in my memory I had long buried. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself I was imagining it. Ghosts wear many faces when you haven't healed. But something in me began to shift. Every evening, when I left the building, he was there, silent, still, holding the gate open as I passed. He never looked directly at me, but I could feel his eyes, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition. There was a strange heaviness in his gaze, like someone carrying the weight of a past they couldn't speak about. One afternoon, I overheard two employees whispering near the entrance. "He used to work in upper management, I heard," one said. "Lost everything. Now he's just a guard trying to make ends meet." Their words lingered long after they walked away. Something about them made my stomach twist. That night I stayed late at the office, finishing reports under the dull hum of fluorescent lights. When I finally stepped outside, the sky was dim, the parking lot nearly empty. The gate creaked as it swung open, slow, deliberate. I looked up, expecting the usual polite nod from the guard. But then I saw his face. For a moment, the world stopped breathing. His eyes, once proud, once cruel, met mine across the fading light. The years had carved exhaustion into his features. His hair was graying, his jaw thinner, his smile gone. But the face was unmistakable. The flowers, the laughter, the betrayal. It all came rushing back in a single unbearable heartbeat. My throat tightened as I clutched my bag, frozen mid-step. He opened the gate wider, his hand trembling, his lips parting like he wanted to speak but didn't know how. The man who had left me in the rain now stood before me, reduced to a shadow of who he once was. I should have walked past him. I should have kept my dignity. But all I could do was stare. At the gate. At him. At the cruel twist of fate that had made the man who abandoned me. My gatekeeper. He looked nothing like the man I once loved. His crisp suits and confident stride were gone, replaced by a faded uniform that hung heavy on tired shoulders. The proud gleam in his eyes had turned to something hollow. A quiet plea. A silent punishment life had carved into him. Fate hadn't just humbled him. It had unmade him. Karma didn't knock. It dragged him here, to the gate that now stood between his shame and my survival. I remember that first moment too clearly. The sun was setting behind the building, painting everything in amber light. I was walking to my car, my mind buried in thoughts of reports and dinner plans for Amara, when the security guard at the gate turned toward me. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Sound, air, movement. Everything vanished except the unbearable recognition that passed between us. He blinked first, as if the act of seeing me physically hurt. I gripped my bag tighter, my breath caught somewhere between shock and fury. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. To make him my gatekeeper, to force him to open and close the same barrier I had once begged him not to cross. Without a word, I walked past him, my heels echoing against the concrete, my pulse louder than the city outside. That night, I sat awake long after Amara had fallen asleep. Every part of me trembled, not from fear, but from the flood of emotions I couldn't name. Anger burned first, fierce and intoxicating. I had dreamed of this moment for years, of seeing him broken, of knowing he finally understood the pain he had left me in. But beneath that anger, another feeling crept in, something smaller, quieter, far more dangerous. Pity. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and for a moment, I hated myself for caring. The next morning, I drove into work, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. I could ignore him. I would ignore him. He was nothing more than a stranger in a uniform now, another ghost in the hallways of my past. But the universe doesn't allow clean exits. Every morning he was there, standing by the gate, his posture stiff, his eyes downcast. He never spoke, never dared to meet my gaze again. But I could feel the weight of his silence each time I passed. By the third day, the whispers began. Co-workers noticed the tension, though none of them knew the story. "He's strange," one of them whispered near the water cooler. "Always watches her leave. Never says a word." Another laughed softly. "Maybe he knows her from somewhere." I pretended not to hear, but the heat crept up my neck. The office, once my refuge, began to feel like another stage where fate performed its cruel drama for everyone to see. But curiosity is a stubborn wound. That night, as I sat by the window after putting Amara to bed, I wondered, how had he ended up there? How did the man who once ran companies now open gates for others? I wanted to believe karma had done the job I couldn't. Yet, deep inside, I needed to know the story. It came to me in fragments, whispered by others, pieced together through overheard conversations. His new beginning had ended like all shallow dreams do, with betrayal. The younger woman, the one he'd left me for, had married him for status. But when the money dried up and his business crumbled, she left. Took what was left of his pride and disappeared with someone richer. His debts piled high. His company collapsed. Eventually, he lost everything, including the home we had once built together. I wanted to feel vindicated, but the truth was uglier than revenge. I didn't see justice, I saw ruin, and ruin, even when deserved, doesn't feel like victory. Still, I avoided him. Days passed, and though our eyes sometimes met in fleeting, painful moments, I never spoke. The distance between us wasn't just physical. It was a graveyard of everything we had been. He tried once to say something as I walked by. "Please," But I didn't let him finish. I simply raised a hand, the same way he once did when silencing my tears, and walked away. But fate, relentless as ever, wasn't done weaving its cruel threads. That Friday, I stayed late to finish paperwork. The office was quiet, the city outside drowned in the hum of distant traffic. By the time I reached the parking lot, the night had settled heavy and dark. My footsteps echoed softly as I approached the gate. The same gate I'd walked through every day, the same man standing beside it. But this time, he wasn't wearing his cap. His uniform looked older, the fabric damp from the evening mist. He wasn't standing in his usual place. He was waiting for me. I slowed, uncertainty clawing at my chest. He stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly, holding something small and folded. The light from the street lamp cast deep shadows across his face, but I could see the truth written there. Regret. Years too late. "Please," he said, his voice rough and low, the words fragile like broken glass. "Just read this." The envelope shook in his hand as he held it out to me, his eyes glistening with something dangerously close to tears. For a moment I couldn't move, torn between fury and the ghost of a love I no longer wanted to admit I felt. I stared at the paper, then at him, wondering if this was another manipulation, or the confession of a man finally haunted by his choices. The night around us held its breath, the silence so heavy it almost broke. I didn't take the envelope. Not yet. But as I turned away, his voice cracked once more behind me. Soft, desperate, human. "It's not what you think. It's worse." His handwriting trembled across the paper, not with age, but with shame. The ink bled into the lines like tears long held back, each stroke a confession carved from guilt. The words weren't written by the man I once knew, but by the ghost of what he had become. Hollow, remorseful, reaching for forgiveness he didn't deserve. Reading it felt like reopening a wound I thought had long healed, but some pains don't fade. They simply wait to be remembered. The envelope sat untouched on my desk for hours before I gathered the courage to open it. I didn't owe him my attention, not after everything he'd taken from me. But something about the way his hand had shaken when he handed it to me haunted me all night. I could still see the desperation in his eyes, the quiet plea in his voice. Against my better judgment, I unfolded the paper and began to read. The first line was short, hesitant, and heavy. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need to tell the truth before life takes away the chance." I exhaled slowly, the words cutting deeper than I expected. He wrote about the night he left, about how he had convinced himself that happiness waited for him in the arms of someone else. He said he thought love could be rekindled by youth, that joy was something new and shiny, not something weathered and enduring. But what he found wasn't love. It was emptiness wrapped in illusion. He confessed that the younger woman had loved his success, not his soul. When his business crumbled, she disappeared, taking his money, his dignity, and the home they had built. The empire he'd chosen over me had turned to dust. "You were my anchor," he wrote, "but I mistook stability for weakness. I thought peace was boring. I was a fool who ran from the calm only to drown in chaos." My hand shook as I turned the page. He described the years that followed, sleeping in borrowed rooms, taking odd jobs, eating whatever he could afford. The man who once mocked my simplicity was now living in it, stripped of all pride. He didn't write for pity, he said, but because silence had become unbearable. "Every day I saw your face," he wrote, "not the way you were when I left, but the way you looked when I broke you. I've spent years trying to erase that image, but it's the only truth I have left." By the time I reached the end, tears had blurred the words. It wasn't love I felt, not even forgiveness. It was something more complicated, heavier, a deep ache for the life we could have had, the years wasted, the lessons learned too late. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt freed. I folded the letter carefully, setting it aside as Amara's small voice broke through my thoughts. "Mama," she called from the window, her tone curious. "Who's the sad man by our gate?" My breath caught. I turned slowly, my pulse racing. She was pointing through the curtain. At him. He stood outside, not in his uniform this time, but in a faded shirt and old trousers. His shoulders sagged, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. From where I stood, he looked smaller. Not physically, but spiritually, as if the weight of his choices had hollowed him out. He didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at the gate he once controlled, but could never truly enter. For a moment, I just watched him, torn between past and present. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who would have opened that gate, who would have begged for his attention, who would have forgiven him just to feel whole again. But that woman was gone. The person standing in her place had learned that closure doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from standing still while the past fades before your eyes. I walked away from the window and took Amara into my arms. "He's just someone who made mistakes," I said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We all do, don't we?" She nodded, her small hands resting on my cheeks, unaware of the storm she'd just calmed. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter sat on my nightstand, the words echoing through my mind. His pain was real, but so was mine. And though part of me pitied him, another part knew I couldn't save him without losing myself again. When dawn crept through the curtains, I finally decided I would return the letter. Not out of anger, but because some stories don't need to be reread once you've learned their ending. I gathered it in my hands, walked to the window, and looked out toward the gate. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint hum of the waking city. But something was wrong. The gate stood open, the street empty, except for a figure slumped against the post. My heart stuttered. I ran outside, the letter still clutched in my hand, and froze. It was him. His body lay motionless, his face pale under the soft light of dawn. The envelope he had given me had fallen beside him, its edges wet with dew. "No," I whispered, kneeling beside him. His pulse was faint, his breathing shallow. The man who once walked away from me had finally collapsed at the threshold he could never cross, and as I called for help, a single thought tore through me. Fate had brought him back, but would it take him away before I could decide whether to forgive him? The hospital smelled like memories I had spent years trying to forget. In the same room where I once begged for our child's life, he now lay fighting for his own. Fate has a cruel sense of symmetry. It brings you back to the place where your heart first broke, just to see if it still bleeds. I never planned to see him again. When the nurse called, saying a man named Daniel had listed me as his emergency contact, I froze. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, but when she said his name again, everything I'd buried came rushing back. The night he left, the silence that followed, the years I spent learning to breathe without him. I told her I didn't know him. Yet 2 hours later, I was standing outside his hospital door, staring at the man who once called me his home. He looked nothing like the person I remembered. His skin was pale, his frame thin, his breathing uneven. The doctor said he was severely malnourished, his heart failing from years of stress and neglect. "He's been through a lot," the doctor said softly, not knowing how much more those words carried for me. I didn't speak. I only nodded, pretending that I hadn't once loved this dying man more than my own soul. I arranged his treatment anonymously. It felt strange, saving the life of the man who had once walked away from mine. I told myself it was compassion. Maybe it was closure. Maybe I just needed to prove that I had grown stronger than the hurt he left behind. But when I saw his weak chest rise and fall, 1,000 old memories whispered inside me, each one reminding me how hard I had tried to hate him. That night, I visited again. The halls were quiet, the air thick with that sterile stillness hospitals always have at midnight. I stood beside his bed, unable to move, unable to breathe. Seeing him like that, fragile, lost, human, made me realize how strange forgiveness could feel. I should have felt satisfaction, but instead, all I felt was sorrow. Once, this man had been my everything. Now, he was a stranger I pitied. I sat there until dawn, watching the rhythm of the monitors. Every sound echoed in my chest like the ghost of a heartbeat I once knew too well. I thought about our child, the one we never got to hold, and wondered if he ever thought about that night, the night he left me alone to fight for both of us. I whispered things I shouldn't have, that I hated him, that I missed him, that sometimes I still dreamed of what could have been. The next evening, the nurse told me he had been murmuring my name in his sleep. "He keeps saying, 'Leah,'" she said softly. My heart stopped. He remembered. After all these years, he remembered. She handed me a few old letters they had found among his things, letters he'd written but never sent. They were addressed to me. I took them home and read them under the dim kitchen light, each word a confession carved from regret. He had spent years searching for me, haunted by what he'd done. I cried for the man he had been, and the time we had lost. When I returned to his room, his eyes fluttered open, dazed and weak. For a long moment, he just looked at me, as if afraid I wasn't real. His lips trembled when he spoke my name. Leah. That single word carried a lifetime. I took his hand, and he held on like he was holding the last piece of his past. I wanted to tell him everything, the anger, the pain, the forgiveness, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't deserve to ask," he said, tears glistening in the corners of his fading eyes. "But can I see our daughter before I go?" The room fell silent. My breath caught somewhere between heartbreak and hesitation. He didn't know that she existed beyond my stories, that she had grown into the light I thought I'd lost. I wanted to say yes, but the wound was too deep. His fingers tightened around mine, his voice trembling again. "Please," he whispered. "Just once." And as the heart monitor slowed, I realized this was not just a question. It was his final plea for redemption. The hospital corridor felt colder that morning, as though it knew I was bringing innocence into a place haunted by guilt. My daughter's hand was warm in mine, small and trusting, unaware that the man she was about to meet was the same man who once shattered the world that created her. I told myself I was doing this for closure, but somewhere deep inside, I knew I was walking her into a moment that would change us both forever. Elise had always asked about her father, not with bitterness, but with that curious gentleness children have when they believe all people are good. I used to tell her he had gone far away, that he was once someone I loved deeply, and that love sometimes gets lost on the way home. But when he asked to see her before he died, something inside me gave way. Maybe it was mercy, or maybe I just needed to face the ghost I had kept alive for too long. As we stepped into the room, he was awake, eyes wide and glassy with disbelief. For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy with all the words that had never been spoken. His gaze drifted to Elise, and I saw the exact moment recognition struck, how his lips parted in awe, how his hand trembled as though reaching toward a dream he had never dared to hope would be real. Elise looked at him with open curiosity, unaware that the man lying there was the reason her mother sometimes cried in her sleep. "Is he your friend, Mama?" she asked softly, clutching my fingers tighter. I couldn't answer. The question twisted inside me like a knife because I didn't know what he was anymore. Before I could speak, his voice broke through the silence, cracked, but tender. "I used to be," he said, his eyes glistening. "Once, a long time ago, I was everything she had." Elise smiled, her innocence disarming, her spirit unburdened by the weight of the past. She walked closer to him, and I saw him tremble, not from weakness, but from the unbearable grace of being touched by something pure. She placed her small hand on his. His breathing hitched, his chest rising unevenly as tears gathered and fell without restraint. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "You have her eyes, the same eyes that once made me believe I could be better than I was." I turned away, biting back the tears that threatened to fall. Watching them was like witnessing two lost souls finding a way to forgive the universe. He looked at me then, the man I once loved and hated in equal measure. His lips quivered as he spoke, each word soaked in the ache of years gone wrong. "Leah, I wanted to come back. I tried so many times. I thought I'd have forever to fix it, but forever ran out before I found the courage. I wanted to scream that courage meant nothing when love came too late, but instead I walked closer and met his gaze. You don't have to ask for forgiveness," I said softly. "You already have it. Not because you deserve it, but because I needed to let the pain go before it consumed what little I had left." He nodded weakly, tears sliding down his temples. "You always were stronger than me," he whispered. Elise tilted her head, watching us with a kind of quiet wonder only children can hold. She took my hand, and then his, connecting us in a fragile bridge made of everything we had lost and everything we still had left. "Now we're all holding hands," she said brightly. "That means no one's sad anymore, right?" Her words were simple, yet they carried more truth than anything either of us could have said. For the first time in years, the air in the room didn't feel heavy. It felt like release. When it was time to leave, Elise kissed his forehead, the way she always kissed mine when I was tired. "You'll be better soon," she said with childlike certainty, and he smiled through his tears, whispering, "I already am." I let her out, her tiny footsteps echoing behind me as he watched us go, his eyes following like a man memorizing his last sunrise. For a brief moment, I turned back and saw him still watching, a fragile smile on his lips, and I knew that somewhere inside him, peace had finally found a home. The next morning, I returned alone, carrying the drawing Elise had made for him, a picture of the three of us holding hands beneath a blue sky. The hallway felt too quiet, the light too pale. When I pushed open his door, the bed was empty, the sheets neatly folded, the machines gone. On the pillow lay his hospital security badge, wrapped around a small folded note. My hands shook as I reached for it, afraid to read what I already knew, that the man who had once destroyed me had left me one last time, but this time he had taken only his regrets with him. The letter was damp when I found it, edges curled, ink bled as if the paper itself had tried to cry the words he could no longer speak. It lay beneath his hospital badge on the empty bed, the only trace of a man who had once been my whole world and then became my greatest wound. I could still smell the faint echo of antiseptic and rain, and in that scent lived the ghost of his last breath, a farewell that would not fade, even after he was gone. For a long while, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The envelope trembled in my hands as though it carried a pulse of its own. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to let the silence between us stay unbroken, but another part, the one that had once loved him beyond reason, needed to hear him one last time. When I finally opened it, the paper felt fragile, almost translucent, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. His handwriting, once bold and confident, now trembled across the page, each word a struggle between guilt and redemption. "Leah," it began, "if you're reading this, I've already gone where no apology can reach. But I need you to know that I left this world with your name still saving me." The ink smudged halfway through the line, and I imagined his weak hand trying to steady itself against the weight of what he wanted to say. "I spent years pretending I was searching for you, but the truth is I was searching for the man I lost the night I walked away. You were right. Pain doesn't go away. It just waits, and mine waited until it consumed everything I was. Tears blurred the words as I kept reading. Thank you for coming back. You didn't have to. You could have let me die with my silence. But you came, and you brought her. The child I never knew but dreamed of every night. The day she touched my hand, I felt something break open inside me. It wasn't regret anymore. It was grace. I didn't deserve it, yet you gave it anyway. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling its weight like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Every word felt like a thread stitching closed the wounds I'd carried for years. I could almost hear his voice, that same low, trembling tone from the hospital. But this time, there was no fear in it, no pride, no anger, only peace. He wrote about Elise, too. Tell her that her smile healed a man who thought he could never be forgiven. Tell her that when she said, "No one's sad anymore," I believed her. Tell her she taught me that innocence isn't the absence of sin. It's the strength to love, despite it. My vision blurred completely at that line. The paper fell into my lap, and I broke. For the first time in years, I cried, not from pain, but from release. He ended the letter with words that lingered long after the ink had faded. Leah, I know you'll never love me again, and that's all right. Love doesn't always survive, but when it's real, it leaves light behind. You were that light. You always were. Don't carry my sins. Carry the peace you gave me instead. That's how I'll live on. Not in memory, but in your forgiveness. When I finished reading, I couldn't move. The world outside the window seemed impossibly still. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has finally decided to rest. I didn't feel anger or pity, only a strange, aching calm. For years, I had wanted him to say those words, to admit the pain, to understand what he had taken from me. Now that he had, it no longer felt like vengeance fulfilled. It felt like a chapter closing gently, almost tenderly, with no need for bitterness. I read the letter again that night. Elise sat beside me, tracing the edge of the paper with her finger, asking softly, "Did Daddy really write this?" I nodded, and she smiled faintly. "Then he wasn't bad," she whispered, and her innocence broke me all over again. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "He was just human. And sometimes, that's worse." The next day, the hospital called to tell me his ashes had been buried at the old gatehouse near the chapel, beneath a small oak tree. I went alone first, carrying the letter pressed to my heart, the rain falling in slow, merciful drops. His name was carved simply, without dates, as if even time wanted to forgive him. I knelt there for a long while, whispering to the earth that I finally understood, that love doesn't need to last forever to leave something beautiful behind. When I returned the next morning with Elise, she carried wildflowers she had picked herself, her little hands clutching them tightly, as if afraid the wind might take them. She placed them on the grave, then bent down, tracing his name slowly with her small fingers. I watched her lips move, and then I heard her whisper, clear and soft, "Goodbye, Daddy." The words drifted into the cold morning air, and in that fragile moment, I realized the story wasn't ending. It was finally finding peace. Every morning, I passed through the same gate that once watched me break. It was here, under the weight of betrayal and silence, that I had fallen to my knees years ago, swearing I would never forgive him, never love again, never believe in the kind of hope that hurts. But life, in its quiet mercy, has a way of turning ruins into thresholds. That same gate that once marked the end of everything I knew now stands as the beginning of everything I became. It has been years since he left this world, years since I last traced his name on the stone beneath the oak tree. Yet somehow, his absence no longer aches. It hums quietly inside me, like a song I've learned to live with. The pain that once defined me has softened, reshaped itself into purpose, and from that purpose, something beautiful was born. The foundation I built began with a simple idea: to turn the ashes of my suffering into a shelter for women who, like me, had been left standing in the aftermath of love that failed them. I named it the Gate of Grace, not because of him, but because of what I had learned through him. Grace is not forgiveness without consequence. It is strength wrapped in mercy. It is the courage to walk through the same door that once closed on you and open it for someone else. The foundation's courtyard stands beneath an arch of weathered iron, the same kind of gate that had once marked the place where my world ended. Now it welcomes those who have nowhere left to go. Thus, walls are lined with laughter now. Women come with their children, their hearts heavy, their eyes tired. Some carry bruises, others carry silence. I tell them stories, not fairy tales of easy healing, but the truth of how pain transforms us if we let it. I tell them that survival is not about forgetting what broke you. It's about learning to build something beautiful in its shadow. When I walk through those halls and hear the sound of children's laughter mingling with their mothers' soft voices, I know that the past did not destroy me. It remade me. Elise has grown into a young woman now. Her eyes still hold that same gentleness, that quiet courage that once disarmed a dying man's shame. She volunteers at the foundation, teaching the children to draw, to dream, to believe in a world that can be kind again. Sometimes, when I watch her, I see pieces of him, the curve of her smile, the stubborn tilt of her chin, but they no longer hurt to see. They remind me that love, even when it dies, leaves behind echoes that can still create light. We speak of him sometimes, not with bitterness, but with calm understanding. She asks questions about what he was like, what I loved about him before everything fell apart. I tell her the truth, that he was flawed, frightened, and human, that he made mistakes he never learned how to undo, and that in his final days, he found peace through the forgiveness we gave him. She listens with quiet respect, then says things that only a child raised in empathy could say. Maybe he wasn't ready to be your forever, but he helped you find who you were meant to be. I smile because she's right. Sometimes the people who wound us the most are the ones who carve space inside us for something greater. This year, on the anniversary of his passing, Elise and I returned to the old gatehouse. The place was softer now, wrapped in ivy and sunlight, the sharp edges worn down by time. His grave sat beneath the oak tree, peaceful, untouched, still bearing the same words. Finally, at peace. I knelt beside it with the quiet certainty that there was nothing left between us but understanding. Pain had done its work, love had done its part, and I had done what I thought impossible. I had learned to live free of both. As we stood there, Elise took my hand, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun spilled gold across the sky. "You always said endings can be beautiful," she whispered. I nodded, watching the light stretch across the path that led back to the foundation, the same path that began with heartbreak and had turned into hope. I finally understood that grace is not given to the deserving. It's given to those who choose to let the past rest. The evening wind brushed against my face as I turned toward the old gate, its shadow falling long and gentle across the ground. I paused, breathing in the warmth of the fading sun, and whispered to the wind, "You became my gatekeeper, after all." The air stirred softly, wrapping around me like a blessing, carrying away the last pieces of who I used to be. The gate creaked open behind me, not in farewell, but in freedom, and I walked through it, finally whole, finally home. If this story touched your heart, don't just let it fade. Share it with someone who still believes healing is impossible. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Your story might help someone else find their strength. Subscribe for more real, soul-stirring tales that remind us pain doesn't end us, it transforms us. And if you're still standing after everything life has taken, this space is yours. You are not alone.